Good morning, everybody. If we can ask you guys to all come in, take your seats so long, so that we can start proceedings. Right. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of Annelie, Nina, Anne-Marie, and Jason, I'd like to welcome everybody here to celebrate Chris's life. Before we start, I'd just like us to bear in mind the COVID protocols. Guys, there is sanitizer available. Please wear your masks at all times. Sanitize your hands, particularly if you're wiping your face. Please try not to hug one another unless you come from the same household. Yeah, let's just try and be intelligent about this, okay? There are going to be a couple of people speaking first. We'll go through them in order. And then at about, we're not quite sure of the timing, but if we finish a little bit. And then at 12 o'clock, we're going to have a parade around the track with Chris's car that has now finally been finished. And a couple of the guys, they'll do one lap, and then people can get in and swap seats and things. And after about the fourth lap, Annelie and family will then go onto the track. If we can give them just a little bit of time to say their final goodbyes. And then after that, we're going to get together, and you guys are welcome to join for lunch. So firstly, I'd like to ask Jason, Chris's son, if you would come up and start the proceedings. Thank you.
Chris Carlisle Kits, one of a kind, mentor, role model, true friend, real gentleman, a man who inspired us all, legend. Although not my own words, I chose these particular sentiments from the overwhelming number of calls and messages that I've received since Chris's passing, because for me, they're a fitting tribute to my dad. Chris had a definite presence, an aura, if you like. Most who met him were drawn to him. He had a strong, calming undercurrent about him, and his charisma and charm wrapped you up like a warm blanket on a cold day. It's ironic because he hated the cold. His brother, my Uncle Francis, tells me, right from an early age, it was clear Chris was extraordinary, destined to become something special. He was gifted with unbelievable patience and was immensely skilled with his hands. With personal qualities so rare, he stood head and shoulders above the rest. Recognized as a leader throughout his childhood and teens, Chris was head boy in both junior and senior school, house captain, school rugby and cricket captain. And he went on to be captain of the East Africa and Tanganyika cricket team. But he told me it wasn't about the position or the sport. It was the success and the healthy competition experienced in achieving the success that he so longed for, and hence his love of racing. I raced BMX as a kid. He would take me up to the Roy Hesketh BMX track in Pietermaritzburg after work to fine-tune my start and perfect my finish to the sprint line, my sprint to the finish line. We weren't there for the physical training, though. Whilst we walked the track, we discussed racecraft, lines, and tactics. But for Chris, BMX was really about my introduction to the power of positive thinking and teaching me the art of being a winner. Many afternoons after practicing, we'd lie on the grass by the finish line, looking at the sky, both exhausted, him from a long day's work and me from a tough training session. Both exhausted, him from a long day's work and me from a tough training session. He would encourage me to replay the thought of me crossing the finish line with a checkered flag waving, signaling my winning over and over again in my head. Visualization is a mantra I still use to this day. During the week before a race, it was all about mental preparation, or conditioning your mind, as he would say. It was confidence building to the nth degree. Jace, you must expect to win, and you will. He would say a positive mindset brings about positive results. Think like the winner you are. And on race day, sitting on my bike on the start line, Chris standing proudly behind me, he'd lean in and say, Jace, you're the quickest guy here by a country mile. No one's got a chance. It was inspirational as a 10-year-old boy. He too was inspired by the thrill he got from competition and the deep desire for me to experience it with him. He loved every minute of it. He thrived on it. Our school days were no different. Annie and I were motivated, coached, and incentivized to do well, always encouraged to do better, and never accept being ordinary. He wasn't interested in our marks, but rather asks, were you top of the class? A qualified teacher by trade, there was always a lesson to be learned from Chris, often an unconventional lesson, as I'm sure you can imagine. Science, maths, and English didn't feature. Our lessons were about staying debt-free, saving, and that cash is king. Whilst we were growing up, all of our close friends were also in Chris's class, so to speak, at the school of life. Janine, Jane, Carly, and Kirsty, along with Bruce and Dean, were subject to many a discussion around being positive and confident. According to Chris, those were the most important character traits for a young adult to develop before going out into the world. I know later on Nina was subject to the same grooming we were all so fortunate to have had. Mistakes were made. Cars were crashed. There were drunken episodes, and hearts were broken along the way. But as Bruce so rightly says, Chris was always there for us. The question we all had from one of those incidents was never, what are you going to do now? But rather, what did Chris say you should do? We all trusted him implicitly to give us the correct advice, which invariably he did, and from which we always grew. At the time, I remember being so proud he was my dad. Funny enough, I can't remember any of us ever being punished or reprimanded by him, but rather counseled on how we should have behaved, what we needed to do to put it right, and how to do it better next time. His counsel was unrestricted. For most of the 20 years Chris and I were in business together, I watched in awe as people from all walks of life would go into his office with the weight of the world on their shoulders and come out looking relieved with a new lease on life. Firm, never condescending, always reasonable and supportive. Such was the way of the man. Country and Western music, giraffes, cats, banana milkshakes, handkerchiefs and funky Friday socks were his thing. But they all played second fiddle to cars. Cars were woven into the fabric of his everyday life and truly his passion. From an early age, I remember having to sit many times on an upturned bucket, a cushion, or a box of some nature behind the wheel of what I considered to be just another heap of junk. It was usually connected by a solid tow bar to a car in front, which Chris drove to get us back from wherever we had found the heap, and often that was way off the beaten track. In his mind, it was always a great find, and it was either in immaculate condition or it had a particular part or bits that he was after on it. Always optimistic and so positive. This usually took place in the early hours of the morning because the cars were never roadworthy, and I was obviously far too young to be driving on the road. It wasn't until much later, and I was much older, that he bought a car trailer to transport his newfound treasures. Many restoration projects and speculative purchases have featured throughout my life. They always involved an adventure and resulted in cars in varying states of disrepair parked all over the place. I don't know how, but Chris could see value in almost any car. I regularly teased him for buying them, saying, "Why the hell did you buy that thing?" He would just smile, and he always had the last laugh. A negotiator par excellence. Chris would convince unwitting sellers to accept his offer because he was doing them a favor by taking a car off their hands. He would perhaps do a bit of work on it, replace some broken bits from his infinite parts store, give it some TLC, and send it on, often for a handsome return. Then he'd convince buyers that they got the deal of the century. More often than not, the seller got wind of Chris's handsome return. Time and time again, he notched it up to good fortune and lucky timing. And because of his wonderful way with people, he was hailed as having a great eye for a deal, and he never fell out with anyone over it. He was immensely proud of the fact that he never lost money on a car he bought with the intention of selling it on. It's sad that his immense knowledge of the Mercedes-Benz marque and of 50s and 60s cars has gone with him. But I take solace in the fact that his love of cars runs just as deep in my son Austin's veins. Wisdom far beyond us lesser mortals. Chris saw the world differently. He chose to see the positives and do things literally his way. He was great friends with, and quite literally, everyone that he met loved him. From Robert, who cleaned his car, to the captains of industry here with us today. Ever a gentleman. On reflection, it was plain for all of us to see. Chris lived life to the fullest and genuinely took pleasure in whatever escapade he was involved in at the time. He got out of bed at the crack of dawn every day and always seemed to have so much energy, foot flat on the gas all day, crossing off and adding light items to his never-ending list of things to do in the process. An inspiration to us all. I have no doubt he's out there somewhere cohorting with other legends, probably Fangio and Sir Stirling Moss, reminiscing about the thrill of competition and discussing their favorite cars. It may well be the end of Chris's adventure on earth, but you can rest assured his afterlife will be a daring adventure, and definitely not nothing at all. Ladies and gentlemen, today we bid farewell to a legend. Cheers, Chris.
Thank you, Jason, for that wonderful tribute to your father. I'd like to call on Mike Kington to please join us. Mike is a long-term colleague of Chris's and a very good friend.
First of all, a very good morning to you all. My name is Mike Kingston. Chris and I had known each other for the past 47 years and have stayed in contact for the full period. Christopher and I started at Rainbow Chickens on exactly the same day, 1st of October, 1974. Christopher was brought in by the late Stanley Methven to run the biggest hatchery in the continent, namely H3 at Camperdown. And me, a mere vegetable farmer who was employed as an assistant hatchery manager with absolutely no status and had to look after the smallest hatchery within the group. It was at our inauguration that I knew and realized that there was a very special bond between us. I also realized that if I was to succeed in the hatchery division, Chris had to be a friend, a mentor. As I said previously, I was just a mere vegetable farmer who knew nothing at all about incubation. Annelie, I am totally honored and humbled to be able to speak about a real, true, special friend. Thank you for the opportunity. And I want to start off by saying that there were two Christophers, and I term them Christopher 1, who all of us in this room knew about, and then there was Christopher 2, who I had the privilege of knowing. Christopher 1 was a man who was known for his flawless manners and charming personality. He was the man who was known for his impeccable handwriting and was the only guy that I knew who basically still wrote with a fountain pen. He was the man who who was an exceptional communicator, and with every problem that occurred, he would provide a solution. He was the man who had a high and exceptional value system and principles and was always respectful and fair to his elders, his superiors, his peers, his clients, his friends, and most of all, his family. He was the man who had an exceptional sense of humor and the most contagious laughter. He was the man who loved and adored his children to bits. He would always take the opportunity when him and I spoke, either telephonically or together, and tell me all about their careers and their achievements. He was a proud father and a good grandfather. He was the man who loved, respected, and trusted his partner, Annalie. There was never a conversation that we had where he didn't tell me how lucky he was to have Annalie in his life. He was the man who had an exceptional aptitude for business and obtained results through and with other people. He led and managed by example. And I am so appreciative to Chris for his contribution to a lot of what's happened in my own personal life. Thank you, Chris. Now, that was the Christopher that we all knew. I had the privilege and prerogative of experience and knowing Christopher too. Very few of us in the room today knew that Christopher was the best incubation in this country during his tenure with Rainbow Chickens. Then the next part is Christopher had this massive obsession of cars. And at our inauguration, I can still remember, is that he spoke to me about owning 43 cars. And I think Chris was only 29 then. I worked it out. That was literally owning 4 cars every year from the age of 18. I looked at him and thought, another arrogant Englishman. But within a period of 6 months of him being in South Africa, and at age 3, I think he had a total of 6 cars that he had renovated, sold, and had in his possession. And it was from that day onwards that I believed everything that Christopher said. Then, as Jason pointed out, there was this man that had an absolute obsession of negotiating, always had to get the best deal, and had this massive obsession of money. And I want you to just understand that here you had this vegetable farmer whose main ambition in life was to own a Mustang. I basically found exactly what I wanted, but unfortunately, I had a Passat 2-door, I think it was 1.2 or 1.3 liter. And the only person that I went to was Chris to basically sell it in a period of about a week. Christopher, in his style, went ahead, had it cleaned up, put the advert in the paper, and basically went along and accepted an offer from a guy by the name of Dick Jake from Dollar Motors. Money was handed over. Chris gave me my portion, and at the end of the day, we both went our own ways. Within one day, Dick Jake then phoned me and threatened me that if I didn't come back, is that he would basically have me fired because he knew my boss and he named him. I then got in my car, went down to H3 and explained to Chris that what had happened is that he had sold Dick Jake a 1974 Passat, but in fact it was a 1973. Chris then blamed the papers in which the car was advertised and said to me that he didn't have the money anymore because he had bought another car. I don't know where we got the money from, but as I say, by the end of the day, we managed to basically give Dick Jake his money back and carry on with life. Then there was, as I said, Chris's absolute obsession of always getting the best deal and making sure that whatever he wanted to pay for the article, he got. And I call it was the briefcase moment. This showed me that what you do is that you basically take a briefcase, put all the money in it, in cash, and when the negotiations come to an absolute standstill and there is no way forward, is that you pick up the briefcase and you open the briefcase, and once the seller smells the money, you get the deal. I assure you it is absolutely true because I've tried it on 2 occasions. Then there was the annual getaway. Every year is that myself, Chris, Annelie, and Anne go down to the Western Cape to a place called Jakhelsfontein, where we spend a long weekend at the end of January. And in typical Annelie's fashion, she goes over and she basically purchases literally everything out of the local spot, Eysterfontein. It's always been a weekend where we sit and we reminisce. There's lots of laughter, a lot of wine being drunk. And Chris, all I want to tell you is that between Annelies and myself, we will continue that pact that we always had. And it'll just give us an excuse to celebrate the life of this great man. Christopher, if I had half the attributes that you had, I would be one of the best men in the world. I thank God regularly that I was truly blessed to have Chris as a friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to introduce Avish Maharaj, who's the chairman of the Mercedes-Benz Club of the KZN chapter.
I can still hear Chris's voice now. It was the first thing he taught me. Avish, when speaking in public, always write down what you're going to say. Even if you have the pages with you, that way people in the audience will know that you've prepared. When I was just a little boy in the late 80s, messing around in my dad's Mercedes-Benz yard next to the N2 freeway in KZN, we were visited by this tall, handsome gentleman who parked his car on the freeway and came over to have a look at my dad's ponton bakkie that was being repaired at the time. After a long discussion with my dad, his parting words were, "Ramu, if you keep this bakkie long enough, you will one day retire for the amount that you sell it for." Turning to me, he said, "Don't you dare let your dad sell this bakkie." And my dad has kept this bakkie up until today with no intention of selling it. Fast forward approximately 20 years later, and fate lets our paths cross again. At the age of 28, newly married, and a new member of the Mercedes-Benz Club of South Africa, I decided to attend the national gathering and AGM in East London. Having no idea what the event was about, I only ended up going on the last day. As I sat there during the AGM, I heard the National Committee discuss the formation of the KZN region. And then the excitement started. There was a call for a volunteer to take on the role of chairman. And I heard this beautiful voice speak up. Annalie, shall I do the voice? I heard this beautiful voice say, "Christopher will do it." Now, I only realized much later that this was the dynamic of Chris and Annalie's relationship. Annalie would commit to a challenge on her and Chris's behalf, to the astonishment of Chris. And the telltale sign when Chris was surprised by this is he would start to speak about himself in the third person. So Annalie would say, "Christopher will do it," and then, "Is he?" And then, "Christopher is buying a round of drinks, guys. Am I?" And so on. So we hear Christopher will do it, and the inevitable, "Is he?" And then Annalie mumbles to him, "Yes, you are." And I think there was an F word in there somewhere, but I removed it for today's event. By now I was losing a bit of hope because this guy looked like he definitely didn't want to do this. But he just stood up and started speaking. And he gave the most inspirational speech I have ever heard in my entire life. And I felt so motivated by it that as soon as the meeting was over, I immediately went over to offer to assist him in this new challenge of building our region. Little did I realize that this was to become a defining moment in my life. Chris welcomed me so warmly into the committee that I actually felt loved when I was with him. And I think the Mercedes-Benz Club of South Africa owes him a debt of gratitude. For if he didn't, you guys would have probably lost out on all my awesomeness. Chris was a fountain of knowledge, and I was a sponge that just loved soaking up as much of it as I could get. Not only on cars, but various subjects. Conversation with Chris was always scintillating, and I just loved being in his company every second I could. During our relationship, Chris played various roles in my life. Father, brother, best friend, mentor, and even sometimes he was my son. But that was when he was so engrossed in a task that he forgot to eat, and I had to force him. But that was his personality. Chris was a very focused individual, the most focused person that I know, and always had brilliant ideas for our region. We had many adventures through these ideas of his. For someone who was always the perfect gentleman, Chris was a real gangster when it came to playing with cars. And we both were, actually. And I loved that we were always pushing each other to do the craziest things in the early days of the KZN region. If I remember, and I can relate one incident, Chris and I were sitting at his workshop on a Sunday morning, and he told me, "Listen, Avish, I've got an old ponton parked at my yard in Orabi, and I want to get it started." So I said, "Okay, let's do it." Packed up the tools and a little bit of fuel and stuff, drove to Orabi, and there was this vehicle, and Jason's speech made so much of sense to me because it wasn't even a vehicle. It probably was a vehicle at some point previously. There's no windscreen, no brakes, no interior, just 4 wheels and engine. So we put the battery in, get the fuel up, start it up, car starting, sounding beautiful. Chris and I are really pleased with ourselves, but by this point, we're feeling really special. And then Chris says, "If I could get this vehicle to my workshop, I could start working on this vehicle immediately." So then he suggests that I drive this vehicle from Orabi to Kenny. So I said, "Listen, Chris, okay, you know what, I'm happy to help you, but there's one small problem." He says, "What's the problem?" I said, on the way from Orabi to Mkondeni is the RTI offices, where the RTI inspectors are. He says, no, don't worry, it's fine. I'll follow you." I said, "You sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure." "Chris, won't something go wrong?" "No, nothing's going to go wrong. Don't worry, you drive, I'll follow you." "Okay, fine." So I'm driving, no brakes. We only got a bit of handbrake, no windscreen. As we pass the RTI offices, the bonnet flies open in the car. So I slow down and I'm stopping because I think he said he's going to help me, so he's going to stop and help me to close the bonnet. As I turn back, he says, go. And I drove past RTI office and I looked to the left, and there's these two officers standing there. And I think they were just so shocked by the audacity of what we were doing that they just didn't move. They just looked at us. And I thought, you know what, this guy's going to chase us, but they didn't. And when we got to the workshop, I was so afraid, but I was also so exhilarated. And that was what Chris brought into all of our lives. Everyone knows his motto, life is a daring adventure, or it is nothing at all. And I'm so glad that I got to share in the life of such a beautiful human being. I could never say everything I wanted to say about him in a few minutes or even in a few days. This is only a small glimpse into my life with him. But with this celebration today, I hope to continue the narrative and look forward to sharing our stories of how Chris touched our lives whenever any of us meet in the future. I want to say a huge thank you to Annalie for putting together this wonderful function today and for bringing the people closest to Chris together to honor his life. Chris spoke to me often about you, Annalie. He really loved you. And I want to thank you for being so amazing to my friend. You supported him in every decision he made. And he felt very secure knowing that you were there with him every step of the way. If I could speak to Chris one more time, my message would be simple. Please come back, my friend. Those of us who you are leaving behind are not ready for you to leave yet. But I know that's not possible. So, Chris, if you can hear me, I want to say that I love you and I miss you. And I know that we will see each other again somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Avish. I'd like to introduce Sven from the Northern Region. He's the chairman of the Northern Region of the Mercedes-Benz Club.
Thank you, Grant. Good morning, everybody. I think at this point it begins to feel like we've all compared notes. Chris was so constant, the same to all. Please do indulge me for the repetition. But I can also only echo Annalie, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak some of my memories of Chris. As Grant has said, my name is Sven. The surname is Krasnokutski, so I do understand why you didn't say it. The chairman of the Northern Region of the Mercedes-Benz Club. And as I say, we've heard and will hear today from a lot of people about Chris and the roles that he played in various clubs and circles and the parts they played in his life. For us, what started as a long-distance association through the club while Chris and Annalie were still living in KZN developed into a close and deeply cherished friendship. And that's how I'd like to recount my memories of Chris as a dear friend. As everyone has said, and I'm sure you'll all agree, Chris was the epitome of a gentleman through and through. He had a strong sense of propriety and decorum. He always had impeccable manners, and he was unfeignedly kind, hospitable, and generous of spirit. Chris was a true defender of chivalry. He was a gracious host on any occasion and an enthusiast in any situation. He made an immediate and indelible impression. People who'd met Chris only once or twice have said to me in the last few days how kind he was and welcome he made them feel. We all know Chris's mantra. Life is a daring adventure, or it is nothing. He also very often said, if you don't do it, you haven't done it. From countless evenings of animated conversation during our many visits, from reading Chris's posts about his various undertakings, projects, travels, and speaking to everyone here today, I do think it's safe to say that Chris did it. He lived the daring adventure. He relentlessly pursued his passions. I can only imagine his irritation at not being able to finish all the projects he had on the radar. He still wanted to perfect the blue fintail. He came very close. He wanted to finish his race and rally cars and enjoy spending time in the Universal, which he was very excited to have found. He had at least another 20 years of work that he wanted to complete. Despite his busyness with his many projects, Chris's willingness to help others was without bounds. He went out of his way to help me through my ponton restoration project, and being a particular passion of his, I was extremely grateful for the time that Chris spent with me looking at fintail, as he called it. And Chris found the right one. I'm very grateful to him for bearing me in mind. And the fintail is the crown jewel will always